Alright, so I just got back from a wrestling tournament, and let's talk about Circe by Madeline Miller. So I'm gonna be honest, when I picked up this book, it was for a school assignment, just like a summer reading reflection thing. So technically it was required, and I didn't necessarily choose it on my own free will. Like, I did, but you know what I mean. I was forced to choose between this and two other books. I'm also reading one of the other books, but that's not the point. But anyway, this was the book I decided to read for one of my classes. And I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I've always been a fan of, like, Greek mythology, so I figured it wouldn't, worst case scenario, it would have that, like, going for it, and I would enjoy that aspect. I didn't expect to, like, not like the book. If I would like it, on how much, I didn't know, but I knew I wasn't gonna absolutely despise it unless something hit the wall. I do not despise this book. Let me tell you. I hate saying this right after I also finished Babel, and I was like, Babel was amazing, but, like, this book was also so freaking good. I devoured it. Like, I just sat down, and I'd be, like, 100 pages in, and I wouldn't even realize it, and be like, and I just, in, like, the span of what felt like 30 minutes, I was already, like, 80% done with the book, and I'm like, I know it was more than 30 minutes because I'm not that fast of a reader, but, oh my god, you just get sucked, like, into it. And I loved it so much, and I don't know why I got so lucky in two back-to-back more, like, serious books. I'm counting this one and Babel. I mean, obviously there's some fantasy to it, but it's not like ACOTAR, right? It's not so romantasy. Like, it's a little more, like, concentration required, and I got so lucky that I got two, like, that I actually just managed to somehow pick books that I loved. I don't know. I'm usually never that lucky. And I'm gonna jinx myself right now. Oh, one of my little plastic ducks fell. It's not important. I'm gonna jinx myself right now and say that I'm never this lucky, and then I'm gonna send myself into a reading slump in about, like, give me 2 weeks. But as of right now, we're actually going pretty strong. And I actually, ashamed to admit, I finished this book a couple weeks ago, but like I said, I had my wrestling tournament, so I did my, like, written reflection on it. I just haven't had a time to talk about it, but everything that I wrote down here was, like, my immediate thoughts right after finishing the book. I just remember this, before I get going, these are, like, ancient Greek names, right? Mythology, whatever. I am going to heavily butcher some of these names. Just putting that out there. Like, do not expect some, like, professor level enunciation, because that is not going to be coming from this mouth. And again, as always, these are my thoughts. I'm not saying it's anything amazing, it's just what I thought about the book. You can disagree, you can agree. I could be off basis. Just my thoughts, and I wanted to talk about it. Disclaimer out of the way. Always love putting that little disclaimer in there because I'm so awkward. Alright. So like I was saying, I love the book, but I really loved the concept of the Witch of Aiaiya becoming, like, a legacy, I want to say, passed down amongst the women. Now, I know there wasn't, like, that much of, like, a legacy going on, but just stick with me here, right? So, witchcraft wasn't, or magic with the flowers, kind of, pharmacica, I don't remember, but it's not a gift of the gods. It was a matter of will, like, to quote Circe, I don't remember what page, but she does tell Penelope that, and I kind of took it as it's always there to comfort women when they feel alone, or at least that's been a common instance of it, right? So Circe found peace in like witchcraft when she was banished and exiled to her island, and she uses it to pass the time, and she becomes a master of the craft. And then she also ends up giving it to, spoilers, Penelope at the end of the book, passing it on, whatever you want to say, who at first felt distance from her son before Athena before Athena came and offered the deal, she felt like distance from her son. And then she used it after Telemachus left with Circe, while she was actually, like, physically on the island alone. So you can also see examples of this in, like, Medea and Pasiphae. So Medea uses it to strengthen herself when she was on the run from her father and had killed her brother. And, not to excuse what she did in any way, but you could imagine that she did feel some loneliness after leaving what had always been her family, at least, like, blood-wise. And then she also very desperately tried to hold on to Jason, like, the man she just met. And I get kind of, like, that was the times, but still, in my eyes, I see that as some type of, like, reaching out from some loneliness. And then there's also Pasiphae, because Minos consistently cheated on her, and she didn't necessarily live the best life either, and because she always wanted to hold on to the attention. She just always wanted people paying attention to her. And I know from the beginning of the book, she's seen as an antagonist from Circe's perspective, but then after giving birth to the Minotaur, you realize that's, like, not necessarily true for her. She just coped with it in a different way. And, like, that was a big reason she gave birth to the Minotaur, to keep the attention on her. And so she was kind of in the same situation as Circe. I would say almost the exact same, because they did grow up in the same house, but they just handled them different ways. And then, of course, there's Aeetes and Perses, the brothers of Circe and Pasiphae. They also had witchcraft powers. Now, it's hard for me to tell if that was kind of like a loneliness thing or whatever, because they weren't on page a whole lot. Like, this story was not about them, obviously. So it could be there. I don't know if it was just, like, a familial line, or if they, like, discovered the power. I don't know. That is, I'm a little iffy on. I was just kind of talking about more what I noticed amongst the women, right? By the end of the book, very end, Pasiphae discovered, like, who she is and what she wanted to be. She had a better understanding of herself. She had always hated her divinity, given fact. And Odysseus even says on page 380, well, technically he doesn't say it because he's dead at this point, but Penelope is telling Circe that Odysseus had said this. And he said he had never met a god, talking about Circe, who enjoyed their divinity less. And so she ends up giving up her godhood and becoming immortal, or at least that's what can be assumed from her vision. And so she uses her transformative witchcraft, turning her from someone with such heavy guilt and loneliness and hate with her, and it all wrapped up with a little bow tie of her divinity. And she used that to change into someone she had always loved from the start, which was mortals. Now, there is something to be said about the relationship with all the different male characters throughout the book. So, her father, Helios, Aeetes, Daedalus, Odysseus, and Telemachus. Of course, there were other male characters, as there is to be throughout a book, like Telegonus, Circe's actual son, and Prometheus, amongst other people, but I'm not going to really be talking about them. So one person I'm talking about is Helios, her dad, god of the sun, technically Titan. Just kind of putting out, he was, like, he abused his power, right? And he always ordered around Circe, and anyone who was beneath him, he wasn't nice to put it very, not delicately, but just, like, surface level. And, I mean, essentially at the end of the book, she kind of, like, just emancipates herself from him to get off the island. And so, obviously, just being under his control to not even being related to him at like, only being blood-related. And also, another guy we have is her brother, Aeetes. So he becomes, like, a king and power-hungry, sort of. And really kind of, I want to say, just disrespectful to Circe by the end, which is surprising because, like, she raised him, right? She took him from the mother, like, fed him, grew up with him, protected him, and all of this, and he still turns against her. He was less and less tolerable to her, and up until the moment with Jason and Medea, and to which he just kind of cut all ties. this can kind of just be foreshadowed, I want to say, when Circe is helping Pasiphae give birth to the Minotaur. Pasiphae says, or it might have been after, I don't remember the exact timeline, but when she was at that island, she goes, Pasiphae says, Aeetes had never liked a woman in his life. Very point blank, you know? But, like, you're thinking, Circe still raised him, he's still gonna care for her, but really, at least for me, I was hoping he was gonna have a change of heart, because, again, he did raise, but that never happened. That did never happen, and it was a big part of him just having so much power at his disposal. Next, I have Daedalus, father of Icarus. I can say Icarus just fine, he flew too close to the sun, but I cannot say Daedalus. And although him and Circe, their time was short, he always stayed, like, humble and kind, pretty much. I would say, like, one of her best experiences she has with a mortal. And he forms, like, what I saw as one of the deepest connections with Circe until him and Icarus passed away. Okay, now this one is, like, a little confusing with me, this Odysseus, which I feel like can be understandable because what Circe is most known for, not about this book, but just the character, is her role in the Odyssey, turning men to pigs, and that is, of course, follows Odysseus, so of course he's gonna have the most substance behind his character, I feel like, or at least in relation to this story. And while he was with Circe, he's immortal, he's a king, but he's immortal, and so he genuinely has a pretty good relationship with her while he was with her. He was respectful and kind, and she trusted him enough to turn the men back from pigs, and she deeply loved him, so much so that she ends up becoming, like, giving birth to Telegonus, her first son. I mean, albeit without Odysseus' knowledge, but he was gone at that point. And when he made it back to Ithaca, he was what seemed like a different person. The way he was described when he made it back to Ithaca, from how Penelope described him, he was a very much different person than how he acted with Circe. He was overly bloody and vicious, like he didn't trust anyone, but then after deeper thought from Circe and her thinking about that, she kind of realizes that those pieces were showing, and that because it seems like two different people, but she kind of pieces it back together, and she realizes it. And simply, when he was with her, he charmed her with his words for survival, and Circe had what I would say was rose-colored glasses for him. Like, he was very, charismatic. He was. And not to say that there wasn't some sort of relationship, because obviously when you're on the island for that amount of time, there was a form of trust, but in the end, he always put his survival first, and that was a big factor between their relationship. And so of course he's gonna act differently when he's there, and then when he's back on his home and he wants all this money and power and money, just more money and, like, territory, right? When Circe was with him, like, she had been alone for quite some time before him, and he showed up with, like, these apologies, and he was respectful for his crew, and of course, from her state of, like, exile, when she's so alone, she sees a man like that who isn't pig worthy, and of course she's gonna make that connection with him. And so she falls in love with him, right? And that's so confusing, because it's like, as a mortal, because, like, I want to say, like, the broad claim that she loved mortals, but obviously there was, like, nothing is ever that broad, but, like, she did really care for him, but was that the real him? And now, obviously, like, this is her book, everything's gonna be skewed than how it's portrayed in the Odyssey, but it's like, he doesn't seem like that good of a person, the way he treated Penelope, or the way he treated Telemachus, right? And he ended up being so agitated that he ended up being the cause of his own death, but, like, we only ever knew him when he was on the island with Circe as, like, a completely different person, and of course she did talk about how there were instances where he would just, like, snap, but those weren't really described on page. So my mind is kind of blanked over them, and I saw him as this really good guy, and objectively, I just don't know. And here's the thing, I'm kind of going off script here, is I read the Odyssey in school. Kind of. And I would have been so good if I fully read it, because then I could have a lot more background knowledge for this, but I thought what I did do in school would have been enough, but I don't think it is, but it's too late now. But anyway, like, what we did in school is we had each of the segments, and you just kind of, like, split into groups, and they would summarize the segment, and the teacher just kind of marked out places on the map, but we didn't read it, which, I mean, I guess it gets the point across, but that's not reading. Anyway, that's not important. I digress. And so, back to my last guy, whatever I was going to talk about, was Telemachus. And you can very easily say, after his interaction with Athena, he just shunned any sort of, like, name or excess power for himself. He did not want that. And in all the past relationships Circe had that I've mentioned, when someone gets greedy for all that all that fame and power and money and influence, that's usually when things take a turn for the worst. But Telemachus completely denied all of that, and she ends up being, and like in 351, he literally turns Athena's promise of that away, and he ends up being the one, at least according to her visions, that Circe spends, like, the rest of her mortal life with and has kids with, and it's like, and it has such a close connection. And I want to say one of the closest, but then again, I get drawn back to Odysseus, but it could also be Odysseus because he's just such a big chunk of the story. Oh, I need to move on from Odysseus. But you get the point. In the end, my little conclusion here, to put it very bluntly, the men who did not abuse their power, typically the mortals, stayed in her life the longest and had some of the deepest connections with Circe. And the men who abused their power, usually those with divine power, she pushed out of her life. And it's like, again, that is very, like, black and white, and the way I'm saying it is very black and white, and of course nothing is ever black and white. You ever seen the thing where it's like, okay, you ever seen I'm off the topic here, but you ever, that one song from, like, Last Midnight, Into the Woods, Meryl Streep, where she's like, you're not good, you're not bad, you're just nice, and I keep feeling like I'm doing that, where I'm like, I make these claims, and then I'm like, well, wait a minute, there is a middle ground, but, like, there is a middle ground. You have to view things with, like, some, like, I'm open to be wrong, right? Because nothing is ever 100%. And with that, I'd say, if you do have a different opinion, please let me know. Again, similar to Babel, I'd love to hear it. Not many of my friends are very much book readers, and I would love to talk about it. So if you have any other ideas in the comments, please let me know. And yeah, I think I'm done talking. Bye.